You're listening to the Lead and Cardboard Podcast. Okay, welcome to Lead and Cardboard. On this episode, we're going to give a little overview of the game Dual Powers, which is a two-player game that was on Kickstarter, I guess last fall. I just received it maybe about a month ago. It's put out by a company called Thunderworks Games. I have no idea who they are. It's a fairly simple two-player game. Go in here on Board Game Geek and tell you the category they have is deduction and political, mechanisms, area control, area influence, hand management, which I definitely agree with all that. And okay, so what else? We're also going to also talk about another game I backed on Kickstarter and received pretty much, I think, within the same week that I got Dual Powers. Is the game Nemesis. Is a science fiction game. Kind of, I guess I would describe it as a cross between the movie Alien and a little bit like Space Hulk, I guess, and also a little bit like the board game Dead of Winter. Anyway, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about 1866, the struggle for supremacy in Germany, a two-player card-driven war game. Also the classic game Kremlin. The miniatures game I've been playing a fair bit of lately. Gaslands, and also a unpublished game, a new game that I'd like to call some attention to. This War Without an Enemy. But first up, I'm going to give a little overview of the game Dual Powers. Dual Powers is a two-player game set during the time between the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia in the beginning of the Russian Civil War. In the game, one player controls the provisional government and the other the Petrograd Soviet, with the provisional government desiring to maintain control of state power and the Petrograd Soviet seeking to overthrow it. The players score points by controlling areas of Petrograd. Control is determined by which side has the most strength in a particular area. Along with the player's unit and leader tokens, there are neutral unit tokens as well. The faction that has the will of the people controls the neutral token. When an area is scored, you simply add up the total strength each player has, with the player having the higher total prevailing. In case of a tie, the player controlling the greater number of tokens has the greater strength, and if that is also tied, then whichever player has the will of the people wins. The number of points depends on the card picked as the secret objective at the beginning of the round, or, in the case of the area of unrest, the current month. The player controlling the objective area moves the score marker towards his end of the scoring track, similarly to Twilight Struggle. The game ends when one player has moved the marker all the way to his end of the track. If the calendar has been advanced to the October or November space and neither player has yet won, the game ends at the end of that scoring phase with the player ahead in points winning. If tied, the player with the will of the people wins. During setup, one section of the map will be denoted as the area of unrest for the round. This area will be scored at the end of the round, along with the areas chosen secretly by each player. Also, one of the connections on the map will have the blockade marker placed on it, which prohibits movement between the connected areas. Finally, each player is dealt their 3 leader cards. Each round has 4 phases. First, each player draws 5 cards from the common action deck. Unlike the leader cards, which are unique to each faction, both players use the same action cards. Next, they will secretly pick one of the cards to play onto the secret objective box. This will denote an area that will be scored at the end of the round and how many points will be awarded. It's possible that both players could pick the same area. Then, starting with the player who has the will of the people, they alternate playing action cards until each player has played 4. Each card played as an action will cause the date to move forward on the calendar. The amount of days advanced varies from card to card. If the player causes the day marker to advance into the next month, that player will receive the will of the people marker. If he already had it, nothing happens. Also, if he causes the day marker to land on the 15th or 29th through the 30th day of the month, he will get to perform a bonus action after playing his regular action. The action cards allow the player to either recruit a unit onto the board, move a unit or leader, or refresh a unit or leader. Every action card has the ability to recruit, while the other action varies from card to card. However, you can either recruit or do the action, not both. When recruiting, the strength of the unit recruited depends on the card, as does the area of Petrograd the unit can be placed onto. Leader cards are different in that they allow the player to place the leader onto any area of the board and use the particular leader bonus action on the card. These are move the blockade marker, look at the opponent's secret objective card, or take the will of the people marker. Once the action phase is complete, it's time to score. The first objective marker is placed in the area of unrest. Whoever has the most strength in that area can either score it, receiving points depending on the current month, or take one of the same bonus actions you receive for advancing the calendar. After this, the player with the lower score reveals his secret objective and places the second objective marker in that area. Then the other player does the same. Then the objective markers are scored, the points awarded depending on the amount of points on the card played as the secret objective. After this, all the pieces in the area scored are exhausted. If a token was already exhausted, in the case of a player's units, they are returned to the player's pool, while leaders and neutral units are removed from the game. At the end of the round, players discard all of the cards that were played and determine the new locations of blockade and unrest. The game ends when one player has moved the score marker all the way to their side of the board, or the month marker is on the October-November space at the end of the scoring phase. The game includes a solitaire variant. Basically, you pick which side you want to play, and you play against the opposition. Many of the rules are the same as in the regular version. The strength of the opposition's exhausted tokens varies depending on the difficulty level chosen at the beginning of the game. Also, the solitaire version has some randomization mechanics and some scripted AI procedures. So Dual Powers is a fairly simple game, but it's probably somewhat deceptive in its simplicity. I think it's like a lot of great games that it's pretty well, it might actually seem, I don't want to say too simple as in, oh, this game is just too simple, I don't want to play it, but more like when you kind of read the rules at first and you sort of think, well, this is really easy, and then when you kind of delve into it a little more, you start to see some of the interactions and all that, and maybe some of the complexity that isn't readily apparent when you first look at it. Even some things, like this happens a lot, I think, like when you read through a rule book for the first time, and the rules say something, and you might think, well, why are they being so specific there? I don't really see what the point of that is. And then when you either read it a little more in depth or you actually play it, then you're like, oh, now I understand. So for example, in Dual Powers, it's very specific in the order that you score the objectives. Well, the first one's always the Area of Unrest, but then the second and third objective are, I think the second objective will be the one of the player who has the lower amount of victory points at the time, and that's followed by the player who's ahead. His secret objective would be the third objective scored. And the game does that because then once you play it, then you realize, because the game ends immediately once the score track has been maxed out. So yeah, things like that. And another thing that makes it really simple is, like, I taught a friend of mine how to play this game on a software called Tabletopia, I guess is how you say it. And he plays board games, doesn't really play war games, even though this is it's certainly not like a hardcore war game. But like he has never even seen like the physical version of the game. It's just it just happens to be on Tabletopia, and I'd say from the time when we first started, like having me explain the game to him, to when we finished was probably only about an hour and 15 minutes. Now, granted, I got an auto victory, but we were about halfway. We had advanced the calendar about halfway through. Which reminds me of one of the really kind of cool aspects of the game is how there is no turn track. So each card you're playing is advancing the calendar so many days, and this is definitely one of the ways that, like, on its face you might think, oh, this game isn't all that complicated. Well, in fact, it is not complicated, but where you see the depth that it has is you really start to see how important it is, the choice you have to make between advancing the calendar to the next month, which will give you the will of the people, which is pretty powerful, or advancing it to the middle of the month or the end of the month. Now, the time where you're really making that decision is when it's getting close to the end of the month. Usually by the time you're past the 20th day, it'd be pretty easy for you to either get to the 29th or 30th of the month, or to take it all the way past into the next month. And so if you take it to the 29th or the 30th, those bonus actions that you get to play can be pretty key, but it can also be really key to have the will of the people. And it also, of course, if you're just thinking about that aspect, then you can't also ignore what exactly the card is you're going to play. Like, what action is that card going to give to you? So overall, I think this game is outstanding. I think for someone who is interested in like war games or like historical games, it like it will definitely appeal to that person. But it's also really nice that, to me, you don't have to be interested in what the game is about, to play it and have fun. So yeah, you can have like two people playing it, where one person might be really into like wargaming and history, playing against someone who just likes to play games, and I think they can both have a good time with that. And it's funny, it didn't occur to me when I got the game and I had played it. It wasn't until just a little while ago it made me, because I was thinking like, yeah, this is definitely a game I'm gonna keep in my bag of games and take it to the game store, let's say. And if someone wants to play a quick two-player game, like I feel I can play this with anybody. And it made me think, and I hadn't thought about comparing it to Fort Sumter, which is the game that came out from GMT, not too long ago. But another fairly simple game, 2 players, and not a straight-up war game. I mean, it's definitely about like an historical conflict, but it's not a traditional war game. And then I really started to think about how I guess I started to compare the two of them. And I would say, and actually I've played Fort Sumter more than I've played Dual Powers. And I think I would say there's definitely, I mean, I'm not really prepared to go into too detailed of a description of Fort Sumter right now, but that game has probably more going on, I would say. There's, I guess, more mechanisms to that game. But overall, like what I just said about Dual Powers, about how I can kind of sit down and bring that out and play it with just about anybody, I don't know if I could really say that about Fort Sumter. And then even beyond that, I think that Fort Sumter has way more of what I'm beginning to dislike about certain games, certainly the kind of Euro style games, where some of them will just pile up the different ways that you can score points. But to the point where it just seems that that's all it's doing. It's really not, like, you feel like, oh, you're just doing that to score points and win the game. You're not, like, it's not taking me to that place. Like, Fort Sumter doesn't make me feel like I'm, back in that time before the outbreak of the Civil War, in this confrontation with, my opponent, where we are confronting one another but trying not to make an armed conflict break out. And I know that's what the game is trying to do, but I don't think it does a great job of that. As opposed to, I think Dual Powers, I think, really does this kind of cool job where it's this kind of struggle going on in this city in Russia at the possible beginning of the Russian Civil War. I think the game really does it does make me feel that way. And it might be because it has less going on, so my mind isn't as engaged with the mechanics of the game, as opposed to, like, it's easier to grasp and it's easier to play. And maybe if I played Fort Sumter more, then it would start to feel like that more for me. But yeah, anyway, I guess I hate to sit here, and I'm not in Fort Sumter. I really like that game too. I guess I'm just saying that, yeah, right. As of right now, I think Dual Powers is the better game, and it's certainly the game that. See, I've been carrying around Fort Sumter, like, since I bought it, and I've gotten a couple of people to play it with me, but I don't feel it has that kind of instant, like, where you can really just explain it to somebody and finish the game within an hour, which I definitely think you can do with Dual Powers. So yes, Dual Powers, thumbs up, great game, highly recommended. So another game I received recently is Nemesis. It's a 1 to 5 players, science fiction game. As I said before, it's kind of like Alien meets Space Hulk, kind of. I'll just read the description real quick on Board Game Geek. Nemesis is a 1 to 5 player survival sci-fi game where players are woken up from hibernation as a crew of a spaceship. The emergency procedure states that there is a critical system failure and the ship can't continue its cruise. The goal of the crew is to find what is causing this failure and fix the situation to safely return back to Earth. The main problem is that one crew member is dead, etc., etc. So anyway, basically each player is playing a character. You have, in the beginning of the game, you are in the kind of, I think it's called the hibernarium, and like you've come out of your pods unexpectedly. Like you weren't supposed, I guess, to wake up until the ship gets back to Earth. Well, you're not at Earth yet. One of the crew members is dead, and the main thing you're supposed to do is make sure at least 2 of the 3 engines are working, and that the coordinates are set for the ship to go to Earth. Now, the big wrinkle is that in the beginning of the game, you are dealt out these goals, I guess. I forget what they're called, but you get 2, and this is all secret. And normally one is, I think they're called. There's a corporate goal, and then there's a personal goal. And at some point during the game, basically the first time you come across the aliens, at that point you will have to choose whether you're going to try to achieve your personal goal or your corporate goal. Overall, the goals involve the ship returning safely to Earth. Not all of them. Or, I guess more to the point, the goals involve you returning safely to Earth. Because the other way you can end the game is you can eject yourself in an escape pod. And if you've done that, you are considered to be alive and on Earth at the end of the game. So there's, it's supposed to be, if you send someone to the bridge to check the coordinates, and you kind of have to be able to trust them, because they say, oh yeah, the ship is going to Earth, are they telling the truth? Because some of the goals are to either kill such and such player or be the only player left alive and things like that. So up front, I will say that I feel the game so far, we've played it about, I think, 5 times now, and I think the game kind of fails with that kind of tension, or whatever you want to call it, where these games that involve someone being like a traitor, or someone who's not doing what they've said they're going to do, and things like that. I think like every single time I think we've played it. So in the example I just gave, where someone goes to the bridge, I think every single time we've played, we've had 2 people have gone to the bridge, and so there's always like someone checking, I guess. I think the main reason that we at least I haven't gotten that, that kind of tense feeling, where you're kind of distrusting everybody and you're trying to figure out what everyone's real motives are, as I think the game is kind of complex. There's a lot going on, and I feel you kind of spend all of your time trying to figure out how to play the game, and also how to just defeat the creatures and do your individual objectives. Also, as my one friend has pointed out, that a lot of the kind of whatever you want to call it, offensive objectives, whatever, like where you have to kill another player, those are very difficult. And usually the alternative, the other objective, is at least seems much easier, and so it just makes sense to pick that one. Granted, even within that, there's still there's still a lot of room to not necessarily be a good. In fact, I'd say overall, like none of the different characters in the game are good guys. That's the other thing about the game. Like and this is actually something. So I just got that complaint out of the way in the beginning. I think because I love those kinds of games where there's a traitor. I really like that, and so far this really has not delivered on that. But beyond that, I really do like this game. I am glad I bought it. It's been a lot of fun so far, and one of the cooler aspects of it is each character, each player basically it's very asymmetrical. So like the soldier, so basically on your turn you have like a hand of cards and you play a card to kind of do what the card says, or there's also certain generic actions that all the characters can take, but they all like, you also spend the cards in your hand almost as like a resource as well. Like a card might say, like, shoot, let's say, or well, shoot's one of the basic actions, but it might cost a card, so you have to discard a card to do that. And even some of the ones, like the cards that you're playing to do something special, they might have a card cost, which doesn't count the card that you're actually playing to do that. Like you have to discard additional cards to kind of fuel that action. And while the basic ones, like everyone has, among the different characters, though, you have different abilities. And I think I think everyone can repair, let's say, can do the repair action, but the mechanic can do it like cheaper. Like let's say if I was the soldier, I need to repair something, I'm going to have to discard 2 cards, while the mechanic only has to discard 1. And the kind of things you're repairing is like some of the. So basically, as you're roaming through the ship, going from room to room, and now it's not like you're not building the board as you go. The board is set, but each room has a hex, like this hex piece tile in it. Those are all sort of dealt out in the beginning, so those are kind of randomly placed every game. So while the layout remains the same as far as the corridors, the specific locations of each room varies from game to game. And also, once you put the room tile down, you also put another little piece on top of that, which when you go into the room, you'll flip both of these pieces over. One would be, this is the type of room you're going into, and then the other smaller piece will denote what exactly the condition of the room is. Like it might be on fire, or it might be broken, which means that whatever thing the room does, you can't use it, such as, let's say, opening the hatches to the escape pods. So if you want to take the escape pod, out of the ship, you have to find that room that opens the hatch. I actually think that's a different room than where you actually access the escape pod. But if you find the room that unlocks the hatches, and that room is broken, well, you can't use it until you've fixed it. And then also, as you go along, you'll run into the aliens, and you'll have to fight them. And there's kind of like an artificial intelligence that controls how they move and all. It's typical, like a lot of these games that are cooperative, or even though I know this game says it's not cooperative, but where you're not really playing against one another, where you're sort of playing against the game. So basically every turn you're overturning. I think they call it like the event phase or something, and the aliens will move. And also, anytime when you're in the room with them, you're basically having to fight them. Overall, I like the game so far. We kind of played it a bunch when I first got it. Now it's kind of fallen off now. We haven't played it in about 3 weeks now. We've been kind of doing other things, but I'm sure we'll get back to it. And I'm hoping that as we play it more and get more used to the rules and how to play the game, that maybe some of the tension I was expecting will actually happen. Okay, 1866, the struggle for supremacy in Germany. This game, it's actually been a little while since I played it, but I do want to talk about it. It came out in 2016, published by Compass Games. I remember, I don't know if I saw it on their website. Um, it was when I first saw it. It was definitely like a few months before it had come out, because I know I pre-ordered it. It was either on their website or the little like catalog they send out a few times a year. And the thing that really I remember, well, two things I guess grabbed me were the subject matter, kind of the Austro-Prussian War. Like I'm definitely going to be interested in things that are not done as often, as other themes or whatever. And the and also something I'll say up front that I think is one of the coolest aspects of the game is the mobilization phase. So so anyway, in a lot of ways, this is typical of card-driven, point-to-point movement war games. But in this game, there is I guess you could say something like Paths of Glory had three different phases, but this one feels, I think, pretty unique in that there's basically a phase of the game that is taking place before there's actually like a war being fought. And in that phase, basically the only thing you can do is build up your units on the map by flipping them from their exhausted to their full strength size, because they kind of all start they all start like reduced basically, and or bringing new units onto the map. And also you can move your units, but you can't actually go into the enemy's territory. And anyway, I thought that sounded really neat when I read about it. It's probably the main reason I did pre-order it. And after playing around with it and playing it, I really do think it's a really cool mechanic, and I really like it. And beyond that, I think the game just playing is it's a good example of a two-player card-driven point-to-point war game. I think it shows an interesting aspect, an interesting part of European history. I think it does a good job with that. Also, I think something I really like about it is, I think a lot of war gamers like to play games solo, or even if we don't really like to play games solo, we often wind up doing that. And what I like about doing that with this game, it's fairly simple. It's fairly simple to understand. So like I really don't like playing something that's really super complex by myself, because then I kind of feel like it's all on me. Well, it is all on me to to play according to the rules. And for more complicated games, I kind of like having an opponent who's going to kind of be there figuring the game out with me. But this game, I feel, does a great job of being simple enough that I don't know, like the rules kind of just become part of the background, and it's more like you're kind of telling this story as Prussia is attacking Austria. I know, like in the one game I played, there's basically a huge battle outside Vienna that the Austrians were able to win a fairly big victory, and it's kind of for the rest of the game, the Prussians were trying to sort of piece together another army to try, and they just couldn't do it. Like they just couldn't concentrate their forces enough, because by then the Austrians were able to kind of thwart them and stop them from concentrating anymore. And so stuff like that. It's just really fun. It's really why I play games, honestly. I really don't have too much else to say about it. Like I said, it's been a while since I bought it, And since I played it, but I did want to call some attention to it. I believe it is still in print and available. Yeah, I know it's on Amazon for about, well, I guess with shipping, it's going to be close to $70. But I don't know, in my opinion, it's really worth it. Very good game. Highly recommended. Kremlin, originally published by Avalon Hill back in 1986. The version of the game I own is the reprint, reprint. Came out in 2014. I've played it twice. First time not too long after I got the game, and that was we didn't really finish it, didn't really, I think, understand what we were doing at the time. Anyway, I played it again recently and played it to completion. And this game is definitely shot up to be right up there with DMOC, as far as one of my all-time favorite multiplayer games. I think it's really cool. If you've never played it, it's so basically you are not playing as the various members of the Soviet Politburo. You're assigning your influence to them, and at the end of every turn, there's like the May Day parade, and the party secretary like waves from the rostrum as the parade goes by. And if you are in control, so to speak, of that particular politician, when that happens, so basically if you do that 3 times, if the guy you're controlling is able to do that 3 times, you win the game. At the very beginning of the game, you will write down the amount of influence you are committing to 10 different politicians, and I think there's about 25 to 30 of them total. And you will give 10 influence to one of them, 9 influence to another, 8 influence to another, 7, 6, so on and so on, all the way down to 1. And this is done in secret. And that's done at the beginning of the game, and you are committed to that for the rest of the game. There's a few times where you can commit more, but basically, yeah, you are kind of tied to those people. And the board is kind of represents the power structure, I guess. So at the top you have the party secretary. Then right beneath him you have the 3 most powerful members of the Politburo. The head of the KGB, the foreign secretary, and the defense minister. And then beneath those 3, I think it's either 4 or 5 politicians that have, now I can't remember off the top of my head the names of their offices. And the key to it is, if one of those 3 ones above them can't do their duties, then their backups are kind of in that lower tier, and then below them is like I think people that don't even really have a position yet, although they can execute the powers as well if it filters all the way down to them. And anyway, so you deal out the politicians in those positions. Now I don't know how the original game works. I've read the rules to the original one a while ago, but I've never played it solely by the original game. I'm pretty sure the version that that I've played is just like the original one, but don't take my word for that. But there's also a couple different variants in the reprint. There's like a 1928 version and then a modern version. But you know, that when you're committing your influence to the politicians, you know their positions, like in that structure before the game starts. So if you want to commit 10 points to the head of the KGB, that's fine. Like, you can do that. But anyway, that influence you've committed is secret, and the way the game works is as you move through the phases of the turn. So like there's a phase where the head of the KGB can purge people from the party. So however, he has to be controlled by somebody to do that, and you control him once you have like openly declared influence, and you don't have to openly declare all the influence you have on him to begin with. So let's say the head of the KGB if I've committed 10 influence points to him, I can just say, well, I have 1 influence on him, and I put a little chin on him, like in my player color, with 1, and I control him then. However, if one of the other players says, well, I have 2 influence on him, well, then he controls him. Of course, I can come back and say, well, I actually have 3. So there's this back and forth, and well, maybe it's not so obvious, but you don't necessarily want to come right out of the gate saying, well, I've got 10 on this guy, because then everybody knows that is the one you've committed the most influence to, and he becomes a target at that point. So, but anyway, yes, the head of the KGB purges people, and it's basically a die roll, and there's various modifiers for it. But if it works, that politician is removed from their office and sent to Siberia. And there are ways that you can get someone out of Siberia, and it's not that easy. The defense secretary, the defense minister, I forget, something like that, he basically puts people on trial. So he either starts investigations against the other politicians, or he puts them on trial. Like if they already had an investigation going from like a previous turn, he can actually put them on trial. Or he can also burn dossiers, which is basically, so when you put someone under investigation, you put a little question mark counter on them. And burning dossiers is you're removing that question mark from them. Then the foreign secretary, the key role they have is they nominate someone to be the party secretary if that position is open. Also, all the politicians age as the game progresses, and you age by doing things. So like the head of the KGB, each time he purges somebody, he ages like 1 year. I think it's either 1 or 2, something like that. And there's a phase of the game where you roll on everyone. You roll for all the politicians in the Politburo, like if they get sick or they die or whatever. So obviously, the older they get, the more likely they are that they're going to die. So anyway, and so if the party secretary position is open, the foreign secretary can nominate someone. They can't nominate themselves at first. But they can nominate someone to hold that office. And at that point, though, they nominate someone, and then it comes to a vote where each politician gets to vote, yes or no. And if a player has declared influence on them, then they get to say what the vote is. So yeah, as you're going along, like times people say, "Oh, well, I'm going to claim influence on him, and I'm going to vote yes," and where I think you have to, like, basically you have to kind of declare the influence and then give someone else a chance to say, well, I actually have more influence than that, and But anyway, the way the game worked, the way the game went when we played a few weeks ago, the foreign secretary. So basically, one of the players had their person as the general secretary, and they had already taken 2 parades in, so they were one away from winning, and we the other thing is there's these kind of, I forget what they're called, like these cards you can play. Either at any time or there's certain times you can play them, like it'll say it on the card. But basically, I played 2 flu epidemics that got the party secretary sick and killed him. So now that position was open. I controlled the foreign secretary, and so I couldn't nominate myself, but I was basically able to cause 2 votes to fail because, and I got the other player to go along with that because the person who was close to winning was looking like they were going to be able to get another person in there and basically win. So I got that vote to fail, and then another vote to fail, and at that point, the foreign secretary, who I controlled, became the party secretary. And however, I controlled nobody else pretty much in like those top tiers. So I was kind of like, yeah, I'm on top, but now I have no allies left, immediately beneath me. But for whatever reason, they were unable to unseat me, and I did wind up winning. But anyway, the game is incredibly fun. It's got, I love games that have that kind of negotiation and kind of voting and aspect. Like I mentioned, like it's right up there now with Democker. Democker I probably still like better. I do think you can play Kremlin a lot, well, maybe not a lot faster, but certainly I don't think Kremlin lasts quite as long as Democker does. But it's also got just a certain flavor to it. So unlike Democker, like you can really do things to the other players. It's much more confrontational. But yes, extremely fun. Highly recommended. I don't know if I know the Avalon Hill one is obviously, I don't own that one myself. Obviously that one is out of print. Let's see if the 3rd edition is what they're calling it. Oh yeah, it was published by Jolly Roger Games. And from what I can see, yeah, okay. Certainly in Board Game Geek's Geek Market, there's a few of them floating around, pretty reasonable, under $50. Wow, actually, let's take a look at how much you would pay if you wanted the original one. Okay, well, looks like a few on eBay for $60. Actually, not that much more than for the original version of Kremlin. Anyway, so yeah, if that sounds interesting, I definitely highly recommend it. It's definitely worth seeking out and trying to pick up a copy. Gaslands, a miniature war game published by Osprey Publishing back in 2017. One of their relatively new line of war games. Well, they've long been around. Osprey's long been around making historical books. Like lots of miniature war gamers buy them, obviously. But they're basically background books, and then they started their own line of miniatures roles. Probably the most successful one, the most popular one, has been the game Frostgrave. I would say probably up until Gaslands, this game is really taken off. I think it was quite a think it was the first. I think it sold out the fastest of all their rules that they had done up until that point. Um, Honestly, I think it's. I mean, it's a really well designed, great game, and it's got, I think, some pretty unique aspects to it that kind of led to it really catching on like it did. One of which, it instead of buying like miniature figures, basically, it's scaled to use Matchbox cars as the pieces or whatever. And I think a lot of people have really gotten off on buying these Matchbox cars or raiding their kids' drawers or whatever, and kind of scuffing them up, repainting them. I mean, some people really, really put a lot of time and effort to make the cars look really cool. But really, you really don't have to do that. It's like to play the game at all. Um, it's it's very fun. It's similar to the game X-Wing in that you're picking a template to use every turn, and then you move the car along that template. And depending on what your speed is, that kind of restricts to like which template you can use. Like if you're going really fast, you can basically only go like straight. You can't do any of the tight turns or whatever. I think the most clever aspect of the game is the whole gear phase mechanic. So every turn, so the game starts like in gear phase 1, and all the cars will be in gear 1, and everyone goes. Then it goes to gear phase 2. Only the cars that had shifted up to second gear will now get to go. Gear phase 3, same thing. Only cars in third gear and so forth. It goes all the way up to gear phase 6. I think so. It's either 5 or 6. There's actually only one type of car that can go that fast anyway, the performance car. But anyway, I'll read a quick description of the game. Gaslands is a game of post-apocalyptic vehicular mayhem. It's a tabletop war game of car-on-car destruction in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Players form a racing team and compete for money and fame, scrapping in between races for the resources they need for the next race, etc. So yeah, it's a post-apocalyptic future. It's Gaslands is basically the name of a television show that is like the most popular spectator sport, and the winner of Gaslands gets to go to Mars, which is supposed to be like a utopia, because like living on Earth sucks, and so if you win Gaslands, you get to go to Mars, and everybody wants to go to Mars. Why I say like the base game is really great. And there's several different scenarios you could play. Like the basic one, and I think the best one, is called a death race, where you race through a series of gates. I think a minimum of 3, and the first car to basically cross through the final gate wins the race. But it's not just a race. Like you can also smash in to the opposing cars, or shoot them with machine guns, or lob grenades at them. There's rules for dropping like oil slicks out the back of your car. And also, I think one of my the favorite ones is basically you're dropping glue behind your car, which I don't know, for whatever reason, just cracks me up. And then in some other scenarios, there's one where I think you're running over and killing zombies. There's another one where it's more of a demolition derby style game. Like there's not an actual race. You're just trying to destroy everybody else. And there's also these automated turrets that shoot at everybody, like whoever the closest car is. I will say that even though the object of the death race is to win the race, in my experience, more often than not, someone wins by basically being the only car left. Everyone else has been destroyed. And twice the game has ended where the two remaining cars basically both blow up at the same time. Usually because the they're relatively close to one another, and the one car will attack the other one and destroy it. But in the ensuing explosion, the other car is also consumed, which is also kind of funny. But yeah, the games are really popular. I will say, like, it's kind of funny, like reading the description that this is on Board Game Geek, and I assume they got that they got this from Osprey, talking about the sort of campaign aspect of the game. I'd say that's actually fairly, it's kind of weak. Like I really love campaign games. Like I've been playing Necromunda lately, playing Legends of the Old West. So I love those kinds of games where you have like or Frostgrave, let's say, where you have something where you're not just playing one game, you're playing a series of games that kind of building up your people. This game, that is not really I don't know, it's not as fleshed out, I think, as the basic game itself. But it's really not a knock on the game, because to me the game it's definitely worth like buying the book. You know, I mean, heck, and you can get the cars obviously super cheap. The only other kind of barrier to entry are the templates, which, let's say, unlike a kind of a higher production value game like X-Wing, where you can just buy all that, you get all that in the box. When you buy this game, you're only getting the book. It does now. You can download the templates and cut them out of paper yourself, I guess. But what I did, and everyone I know that plays it, you go on Etsy and basically search for Gaslands templates and buy them for like $15-$20. I think you can buy them also through the designer's website. I'm not sure about that. Oh, the other thing are the dice, and that's the other kind of cool aspect of the game, I think, is so basically every turn you're picking your template, you lay it down, and then before you move, you roll your skid dice, and they're basically six-sided dice where three of the sides are the shift symbol, and then the other three are either slide, spin, or hazard. And so basically, a lot of the things you're doing as you're driving your car, you're receiving hazard tokens. Like every time you shift up in gear, you get a hazard token. Every time you do have one of the other non-shift things, like spin, like where you can rotate your car, if you use that, you're going to get a hazard token for that. And once you have 6 hazard tokens, you wipe out. So you basically you basically kind of slide and you go back to gear 1 or whatever. Anyway, so that's pretty cool too. But yeah, those dice, I actually made some, and mine are pretty cheesy looking, I think. Like I have blank 6-sided die, and I printed out the symbols on paper and just cut them out and glued them. But I mainly did that because at the time the custom-made dice were all sold out everywhere. And you could just use a 6-sided die because it just used the numbers, like 1 to 3 are shifts and 4 is this, 5 is that, whatever. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that either. But it is cool having the custom-made dice. But yeah, Gaslands, another great game. I know there's some expansion. There's an expansion coming, and I'm hoping that they're going to do more with the campaign aspect of the game. So yeah, like in general, I'd say the core game is fantastic. Some of the other stuff is, like, we have played a few times now with a war rig. So you can thinking like like the Road Warrior or Fury Road, where there's like a big giant like truck, and everyone else is trying to take it down. Like the rules for that are they're a little wonky in my opinion. In fact, it's not just me. Like all of us are saying, like it was kind of impossible to take the truck out. So we kind of house ruled some things there, which I normally don't like to do. But anyway, I'm hoping like the expansion maybe just kind of improves an already a great, fantastic game experience. Okay, leads me to the last thing I'm going to talk about is can't even really say a new game because it's not even out yet. It's called This War Without an Enemy, the English Civil War, 1642 to 1646. This is English Civil War, probably one of my favorite, well, it's definitely one of my favorite, if not my most favorite time period in history. I love the pike and shot era and the English Civil War in particular. This is a game that's going to be put out by Nuts Publishing. It's a block game, and it definitely looks like they've taken, so two of my favorite games are Hammer of the Scots and Richard III. In fact, I say Richard III might be my favorite game of all time. It's maybe tied with Twilight Struggle for that, but it's taken the basic block game premise, and it's definitely added some chrome to it, without a doubt, and it really looks intriguing. There's definitely some similarities with GMT's Unhappy King Charles, which is not a block game, but has some of the same things where there's different areas of England, like the north, west, and south, and so forth, where you will be, some of your leaders will be limited, to one area or another. And instead of using a common deck for both sides, each side has its own deck of cards. And what I was looking at, seemed pretty cool, is each block is a different type of unit. So there's artillery, like infantry and cavalry, and that's basically how. So when you fight, there's a lot of interaction with it's really trying to simulate, let's say, cavalry will only fight themselves as long as there's cavalry to fight. So meaning that if the royalist cavalry, if there's parliamentarian cavalry to fight against them, then that's who's going to fight. But let's say once all the Parliament's cavalry has been eliminated, then the royalist cavalry would then be able to attack the Parliament infantry, and what it appears to be at an advantage. So it's simulating that whole, let's say, a battle where the cavalry's been driven off, or they've ridden off after the baggage train. So maybe, and then the enemy horse is wreaking havoc in their opponent's infantry. So that really sounds cool. I don't want to talk too much about, I guess, I don't think any of the artwork is it says this is from Nuts Publishing's website. It says all visuals are temporary, only the cover, the game board, and the stickers are in advanced stage. So okay, so the blocks will look like this, and so far they look really cool. And of course, so there's blocks for there's different types of troops that I just said, but then also for leaders, like Prince Rupert and so forth, and the king. It's looking very neat. It says, This War Without an Enemy is a two-player strategic block game on the First English Civil War, during which the royalist forces fighting for King Charles I were opposed by the English parliamentarian troops and their Scottish allies, the Covenanters, in a struggle for political, economic, and religious control of England. The game engine will be familiar to anyone who has played a card-driven block war game. So let's say there's a initiative phase. Yeah, so yeah, you're playing a card, and depending on which card you play, that'll determine who gets to go first. There's strategic plays, strategic phases are basically you're taking your turn, you're making your moves. Then the other player makes his moves. Then you fight the battles. It looks like there's going to be a tactical battle board that you'll set everything out on, which is nice because I know with the other games I have kind of printed out my own to kind of keep the blocks to keep it more organized, I guess. Supply phase and victory phase. So, but yeah, this war without an enemy. I'm certainly pretty excited about it. In fact, I think it's been a while since there's been a game that isn't out already. I remember way back, well, it's not that long ago, but it seems like a long time ago now that when I pre-ordered Richard III, it was I think 2 years between when I pre-ordered it and when I finally got it. It seemed like I did that a lot. There'd be games that I would know about ahead of time and just be anticipating them. And now lately, it just really hasn't been the case. A lot of most of the games I've been getting have already been out. So yeah, this is something I'm definitely going to be pre-ordering and looking forward to. Okay, thanks for listening. Next episode, Necromunda, Legends of the Old West, Brass, A Song of Ice and Fire tabletop miniatures game, and Dungeon Degenerates. Thanks for listening.
Надо нам, ребята, жизнь красивую прожить. Надо что-то важное, ребята, в нашей жизни совершить. Сама собою жизнь ведь не построится, вода под камушек не потечет. Нам надо стигнуто не успокоиться и не снижать души своей полет. Надо нам, ребята, жизнь красивую прожить. Надо что-то важное, ребята, в нашей жизни совершить. А мы работаем, пускай устали мы, но от усталости никто не хмур. Под вечер солнышку мы скажем на небе: не уходила б ты на перекур. Надо нам, ребята, жизнь красивую прожить. Надо что-то важное, ребята, в нашей жизни совершить. А нашим девушкам мы скажем милее: вы спойте ласково нам о любви. С горами сможем мы тягаться силою, нам вдохновение даете вы. Надо нам, ребята, жизнь красивую прожить. Надо что-то важное, ребята, в нашей жизни совершить. А в небе радуга, как звонкий колокол, а небо синее глядит в глаза. Мечта нам видится не белым облакам, зарей летящую на парусах. Надо нам, ребята, жизнь красивую прожить. Надо нам, ребята, жизнь красивую прожить. Надо что-то важное, ребята, в нашей жизни совершить.